In the late 1970s, the United States Air Force believed it needed a new kind of bomber. Something fast, something low, something that could slip beneath radar nets and reach the heart of any threat on Earth. They called it the B-1. Since the late 1950s, strategic air crews had trained to fly at 500 feet, and after the 1960 U-2 shoot-down, it proved that high altitude was no longer adequate protection. The low-level mission became standard. Throughout the early 1960s, B-52 crews were reinforced and equipped with terrain avoidance radar, giving the United States a fully operational, low-level strike capability long before the B-1 existed. The debate of the 1970s wasn't about acquiring a low-level capability. It was about whether the aging B-52 could keep surviving that mission against modern Soviet defenses, or whether a faster, stronger aircraft was needed. But before it became a symbol of American power, the B-1 became a symbol of political warfare. To the people who built it, the B-1 wasn't just a machine, it was a promise, a future, a belief that American aerospace could still do the impossible. But Washington had other plans. On June 30th, 1977, President Jimmy Carter announced the cancellation of the B-1 program. He believed cruise missiles and stealth technology would make the bomber obsolete. He believed the future would arrive faster than the aircraft could. In factories across the country, the announcement hit like a shockwave. Several departments and groups within both government and industry opposed the resulting layoffs and worked to preserve the program's infrastructure. Following President Carter's 1977 cancellation of the B-1 bomber program, Boeing emerged as one of the chief beneficiaries of the administration's redirected defense spending. With the shift toward cruise missile technology and the modernization of the B-52 fleet, Boeing secured major contracts for the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile and extensive B-52 upgrades. These programs funneled billions of dollars into Boeing's defense division, revitalizing its workforce and positioning the company for a strong resurgence in the late 1970s and early 80s. When President Carter canceled the B-1A, Rockwell laid off thousands of highly specialized aerospace workers. What's rarely discussed is that Boeing recruiters were already positioned in Palmdale and El Segundo before the layoffs were even finalized. They targeted avionics specialists, systems integration engineers, tooling and jig technicians, composite structure fabricators. This gave Boeing an instant infusion of Cold War-trained talent, accelerating cruise missile and B-52 modernization programs far faster than expected. Most historians never mention this workforce transfer. For the engineers at Rockwell, it felt like watching a giant die in slow motion. For the Air Force, it felt like losing a weapon they believed the nation still needed. The cancellation of the B-1 bomber program was not a Soviet victory, despite U.S. political claims that Moscow celebrated. The Soviets actually viewed the shift to air-launched cruise missiles as a greater strategic threat than the bombers themselves, complicating their arms control efforts more than the original program would have. The B-1A cancellation was meant to support the SALT II treaty, showing U.S. commitment to limiting nuclear delivery systems. Carter halted the bomber to prove restraint in arms buildup, but the move instead deepened mistrust. The Soviets saw cruise missile expansion as a hidden escalation. For 4 long years, the B-1 existed in a strange twilight, not alive, not dead, just waiting. The Air Force continued to argue for it. Rockwell kept the tooling ready. Pilots trained on simulators that no longer had a future. And somewhere inside the Pentagon, a quiet truth lingered. The world was changing faster than anyone expected. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan reviewed the state of American strategic forces. He saw aging bombers. He saw expanding Soviet air defenses.
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
By the early 1980s, the Soviet Union had built a nearly impenetrable air defense wall. About 10,000 SAM launchers, 100 ABM silos, and more than 2,500 interceptor aircraft. High-altitude bombing was finished. Reagan's buildup answered Soviet advantages in their missile forces, their deployments in Europe, and their growing navy. But one need stood above the rest: a bomber that could survive the approach. The B-1 returned because only a low observable high-speed penetrator like the B-1B could slip through the Soviet defense density that made every earlier bomber obsolete. He saw a gap that needed to be filled, and he made a decision that stunned the world. The B-1 would return, not as the aircraft President Carter canceled, but as something stronger, faster, and more survivable, a reborn machine for a new era. The B-1B was born, redesigned, hardened, transformed. A phoenix rising from the ashes of politics. On September 4, 1984, the first B-1B rolled out, not as a relic, but as a declaration that American aerospace can still defy expectations, a declaration that a canceled aircraft could return stronger than before, a declaration that sometimes the future arrives exactly when it is needed. The B-1 began retiring in 2021, but in 2025 the Air Force selectively restored several airframes to extend the bomber force while the B-21 Raider entered service. The B-1 was supposed to die in 1977. Instead, it became one of the most formidable bombers ever built. Not because of politics, not because of theology, but because thousands of people refused to let it disappear. Was the B-1 program shaped more by the aircraft's capabilities, or by the radically different defense policies of the two administrations that debated its fate? Let me know your thoughts out there.